The world is in a tizzy over TikTok.
Well, they just banned TikTok in India.
Yes.
Completely holy fucking shit.
The Biden administration has reportedly warned that it will ban TikTok.
TikTok is straight up ripping all the information you have on your phone.
Do you want all that information ultimately residing under the guise of the Communist Party of China?
They watch you when you're masturbating, they know what you search.
And while looking to China and other global superpowers for surveillance evidence has merits, you might be surprised to know that there's already a much smaller, more inconspicuous nation that may have already infiltrated your phone. Finland. To be clear, this is all very tongue-in-cheek, as there's no actual evidence to suggest that Finland is spying on the world via our smartphones, but they have established an immensely strong foothold on home screens across the world, all thanks to a robust mobile game development industry. There are now 250 game development studios located in the country, with an annual turnover of 2 billion euros as of 2020. For a country with a population of under 6 million people, this means that their per capita earnings from game development are huge, routinely cited as the highest on the entire planet. So it's no surprise that Helsinki has been called the mobile gaming capital of the world. Think of it this way. How has Merge Mansion, from Finnish game developer Metacore, managed to snag both Kathy Bates and Pedro Pascal for massive ad campaigns? They are shockingly lucrative, and that's just one. All of these games were made by Finnish developers. And all of this can be traced back to one company, a menagerie of colorful animals, and a tightly knit community of creators working to literally change the game forever. This is how Finland took over your smartphone. The first ever video game developed in Finland was called Chessmac, and it was designed by this guy, Raimo Suonio, in 1979. It was made for a system called the Telmac 1800, which was an early computer kit system mainly bought by Nordic electronics enthusiasts, since there were only about 2,000 ever made. It's safe to assume it didn't take the country by storm. In fact, this was the kind of relative vibe and scale of Finnish game development for years. A small group of highly motivated computer engineers and software developers making do with less than ideal components. But while that community was small, it laid the groundwork for a highly influential subculture that would be the proving ground for the next generation of computer engineers, software designers, and CEOs. It's called the demo scene. The demo scene was at the nexus of hacker culture and digital art. Basically, people realized that with enough time and know-how, they could break into and alter the code of programs and games that their computers were already running. One of the most common in-jokes at this time was to add your name to the credits that would load when you booted something up. And over the course of the next few years, people started adding not just text, but also visual designs, motion graphics, music. Entire intros, or demos, were being added to programs or made entirely out of whole cloth. In Finland in particular, this practice got so big that it actually became the world's first digitally exclusive UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage practice. In 1992, one of the world's largest and most important demo scene parties, or demo parties, was established just outside Helsinki. Assembly. Assembly was like a big convention where everybody would bring their computer, hook them up together in a big hall, make art, show it off, and hang out with people with similar interests. And this thing got huge. It's actually still going today and is hosted inside a giant hockey arena in downtown Helsinki. But it wasn't just a party. It was also a networking opportunity. A ton of demo scene, and specifically assembly participants, were doing things no one else was thinking of at the time. Two of the most well-respected and long-lasting Finnish game development studios were actually founded by assembly participants in 1995. Remedy, creators of Alan Wake, Control and Max Payne, and Housemarque, developers of Returnal and Supreme Snowboarding. And as all of this artistic prowess, technical expertise, and entrepreneurial thinking were beginning to synthesize, some powerful people began to take notice. One of the players that had their eyes on this group of young upstarts was a company called Nokia. Now, you might know Nokia from their brick phones, the famous Nokia 3310. But to Finns, they are so much more than that. They got their start as a series of pulp mills based out of the city of Tampere in 1871. They eventually moved on to rubber and then radio and telecommunications equipment. By the time the late 70s rolled around, they were the Finnish company. They had over 35,000 employees, and Finns today still take a lot of pride in being the home of Nokia. In 1997, Nokia, then the world's dominant mobile phone company, released their famous 6110 model, which came pre-programmed with the now legendary game Snake, based on the arcade game Blockade and programmed by their own Taneli Armanto. And it worked like gangbusters. It is hard to overstate just how much the world loved Snake. I loved Snake. My mom loved Snake. Everybody loved Snake. This let Nokia know that games were worth investing in. So they looked to the demo scene and assembly for help. Nokia started funding independent game development studios across the country so they could subcontract them to develop games for their devices. This gave rise to the real first wave of independent game studios in Finland. Even the Finnish government started to see the potential goldmine that they were sitting on. Tekes, a research and development agency of the Finnish government for innovative projects, began funding game development companies as well, hoping that they could find the next Nokia. Nokia was looking to the demo scene in particular because the processors in their devices were more akin to the rigs that demo scene participants were working with, and they wanted to launch something entirely their own, a brand new wireless action protocol, or WAP. Ultimately, WAP flopped, but the infrastructure and teams for game development were still there, just waiting for the next opportunity to come along. So Nokia decided to take a big swing and develop not just software, but hardware. In 2003, they launched the Nokia N-Gage, a mobile gaming-centric cell phone that they thought was going to be the next big thing, a Game Boy killer. Now, I was 10 years old when the Nokia N-Gage came out, and I thought it was a really cool idea. Cell phones were still kind of this mystical thing that only adults used, so to be able to combine that with my Game Boy was just mind-blowing. But unfortunately, the N-Gage, just like WAP, was a tremendous failure, and it was ultimately discontinued in 2006, with some features being implemented on the Series 60 phones a few years later. Finnish game developers, well-funded and extremely talented, were once again left out in the cold without something to produce for. And this was also the beginning of the end for Nokia as well. They puttered along with some growth over the next few years, but a new competitor was coming, and there was blood in the water. Everything changed in 2008 when Apple launched the App Store, a revolutionary digital software distribution platform. This was big for a few reasons. Number one, all of those developers who'd been left out in the cold when the N-Gage failed were easily able to pivot to the iPhone software developers kit. Plus, especially early on, a digitally exclusive platform meant less capital had to be invested in distribution, which was huge for independent studios. All of these firms who had been getting funding from Nokia and the government suddenly had a new revenue stream that they could use, one that was about to explode. For instance, one studio in the mix at this time was a little company called Rovio. In 2009, they weren't doing so hot. They'd made over 50 games and none had really taken off. They were on the verge of bankruptcy, trying to come up with an idea for how to stay afloat, when senior game designer Jaakko Isalo showed them a little mock-up that he had made of these characters. A series of angry-looking birds with no visible wings or legs. That's right, it was Angry Birds. While initial sales were pretty slow, once it was featured on the App Store, they skyrocketed. And because it initially only cost about 100,000 euros to develop, Rovio was one of the first companies to reap the rewards of an exclusively digital distribution model. And other developers immediately followed. A swath of successful mobile games came out of Finland at this time. Studio Supercell soon released their smash hit Clash of Clans, followed by Heyday and Clash Royale, and became the first Finnish studio to successfully implement the microtransaction model, which, whether you like it or not, has been wildly successful. These companies were the vanguard, pushing the Finnish game development industry to new frontiers at a pace never before seen. And they were established enough in their own right at this point that they were no longer reliant on Nokia, which was ultimately bought by competitor Microsoft in 2013. The next several years were what Koope Hiltunen, director of the trade organization NeoGames Finland, has called the golden age of mobile gaming. As the prestige of Finland's industry has risen, so have profits, and as such, Finland sees significant tax revenue from these companies, and sees a reason to incubate them. Finnish game developers are routinely reported to be the highest taxpayers in the country, both on an individual and company level. It's estimated that the taxes paid by Supercell and its founders alone have raised Finnish capital gains by 20%. And all of this money has brought even more attention to the game industry from outside of Finland as well. In 2016, Supercell was bought by the Chinese megacorporation Tencent. In 2022, Next Games was bought by Netflix, who also just established their own studio in Helsinki. And Rovio, makers of Angry Birds, just turned down a 700 million euro offer from Israel-based firm Playtika, hoping a competitor like EA, Take-Two, Sony, Netflix, or Disney might step in and fill their shoes. This huge influx of cash from international acquisitions might sound incredible, but it does come with some questions. Namely, can this last? Even if this is a valid and lucrative way for Finnish companies to scale up their businesses, it does come with some risk. Big name developers have become notorious for sending more crunch-driven work to developers in countries with cheaper, less protected labor. So who's to say that they don't get fed up with Finland's worker protections and decide to cut the cord? A company like Tencent or Netflix has little to lose by shuttering a studio that's not performing up to their standards. I mean, just think about what happens if you don't immediately binge a series on Netflix that you probably think you're gonna like. You're probably not gonna get a season 2. These companies, even if they can afford it, are pretty risk-averse, so there's been reports of a recent dip in innovation, which might explain why companies are taking longer to regularly release titles, or why some are switching to the much more predictable, perpetual cycle of a games-as-service model. It's too early to tell, but this might explain the recent 6% dip in global game sales the sector has undergone since the pandemic boom just a few years ago. Could Finland's game development industry be the next one to have its work shipped outside of its borders? Will the bubble burst? Even if it doesn't, Finland has a lot of work to do in order to keep up with demand. Currently, there is a need for more workers in the space, like a lot of industries in Finland, and currently only just over a quarter are coming from outside its borders. In order to keep up with demand, industry, state, and culture will have to adapt in order to attract foreign talent. What that looks like, I'm not so sure. But if there's one group that's on the front lines of this changing landscape, it's those within the game industry itself. And they have a lot going for them in terms of advantages. For a country with a notoriously challenging language to outsiders, they're already one of the industries that heavily relies on English. It also boasts a relaxed pace, high earning power relative to the local cost of living, a respect for work-life balance, and a claimed resistance to relative crunch, which is a big problem for game developers across the world. Plus, Finns in general just have high levels of reported security because of state support for education, healthcare, and other costs of living. Industry experts also commonly cite how tightly knit the industry is. While it is prolific, it is relatively small in terms of total numbers of people involved. These developers tend to stick together, often forming mentor-mentee relationships, and knowledge ends up getting shared across and between firms rather than staying siloed within them. As Next Game's chief marketing officer Sara Bergström explains, in true Finnish fashion, their success is derived from their culture of being very direct, where sharing feedback and experiences among companies is common. They have the world's most active Game Developers Association chapter in Helsinki, with hundreds of developers participating in monthly get-togethers. This kind of social industrial support could save them in the event of total catastrophe. Even if the entire industry were to collapse overnight, it might resemble what happened with Nokia's downfall. A dedicated, talented workforce in games might transition to other software development projects. Finnish food courier startup Volt just had the second ever largest acquisition in Finnish history when it was bought by DoorDash, and gaming technology is now routinely being used in other industries as well, with Unreal Engine being used in film and TV production, and VR being used to train people in the medical field. The possibilities are endless. As Koope Hiltunen put it, the industry isn't going to just disappear overnight. They just have to focus on getting as much of the global cake as possible. But if there's one thing that assures me that Finns are probably going to be fine, it's their history of doing just that. The entire industry, and really the whole country, has an ethos built on making something great out of very little. It's almost alchemical. These developers, from the early days of Assembly and Demo Scene to the zenith of Clash of Clans and Angry Birds, have been spinning the digital straw of ones and zeros into near literal gold for almost 30 years. Maybe in 30 more, we'll be watching the Game Awards streamed live from Hartwall Arena in Helsinki, or a Nintendo Entertainment Findy showcase. And even if we aren't, I don't think Finns will really care. They already gave us the bird. Just before you go, I just want to say thank you for watching Finlandery once again. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. All of that helps make sure that more people see these videos that I work really, really hard on, because I love talking about things like that. So first of all, that. Second of all, if you are curious about some really great independently designed Finnish games, I don't play a lot of mobile games, but if you want to play one of my favorite Finnish independent games, I really love Baba Is You. It's an awesome, brain-melting, block-pushing puzzle game. It's just the coolest thing, and it makes you go, aha, every 15 minutes. There's a great Game Maker's Toolkit video about why it's so great that also doesn't spoil anything, so I'll link to that in the description below. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again very soon. Moikka!